Let's go.
All right, we are live here. Are we live on Instagram? Go live. And here it is. The Army values, the Warrior ethos, coaching, and therapy. This is Warrior Leadership. This is Warrior Leadership. And this is JJ Hardy here with Victory Coaching. And I'm over here with
DB the therapist.
DB the therapist.
Yes.
And DB, it's a wonderful day, man, because we are going to talk about another, I think this is our, second conversation in the social skills series.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about active listening and why, first of all, why that's a social skill. And also, you know, what the second and third order effects are if you do not use active listening. So I'd like to start it off with you, just like always, because we got to get that therapist point of view. Okay. What do you say?
Well, first, I'm going to start off by saying that there's a difference between listening and hearing someone, right?
Correct.
I think a lot of times when we're speaking with someone, we'll say, I hear you. Well, hearing someone is not actually listening to them. And listening is, and I'm going to give you a brief little definition of it, is a mental process of interpreting sound waves in the brain that we focus on hearing upon the stimuli we wish to attend to. Listening isn't passive. You must interpret the stimuli into meaning and in action. And so when it says listening isn't passive, that's where this idea of active listening comes in at, where there's a need for you to actually engage with the person that's speaking, not be thinking about a rebuttal, not be thinking about your position or anything like that when you're listening. Actively listening.
Actively listening. Yes. And the way that I have, you kind of said it, but you know, the way I've always taught active listening throughout the years is that when you are having a conversation with someone, I had a box elder bug on my hand. Anyway, it's that time of year. When you are having a conversation with somebody and say they're right across the table from you, there are certain things, both verbal and nonverbal, that will cause it to go away from that idea of active listening. And active listening is the idea that you are listening to what the person has to say and responding to what they said instead of responding with something that you've been thinking about the entire time they've been talking. But in addition to that, there's another tier to that. So if you're having a conversation with somebody and your eyes are wandering, do you think that they think they're listening to you? If you are sitting back like this, there's going to be some thoughts rolling through that person's mind. Well, by the way, on Spotify, if you are not watching this or wherever you're hearing this, I have my arms crossed and I am leaning back in a defensive stance. And if you're having a conversation with somebody and they're talking and you're in that defensive stance, do you think that they are going to openly continue to say what they're saying, or are they going to be like, oh man, that jerk JJ, the coach, is over there judging me and he probably thinks I'm saying something really bad? Well, you know, whether that's what you are intending or not, there is verbal and nonverbal communication. So if the way that you make eye contact with somebody, the way you look around the room, if you're not making eye contact with them, when you're looking down and you're fidgeting with something, any of those things, if you're not in the conversation and that other person thinks you're in the conversation, then you're not active listening. And then the end of the conversation where you actually have the opportunity to respond, if you don't respond to what they said, an example of that would be if DB was talking to me and he said, JJ, you know, I'm really concerned about what you just said about active listening right now. And then I responded with, hey man, what are you doing this weekend? Would I be listening? No. So I'm not going to go any more into that. But the idea of active listening is that you are in the conversation, not just a fly on the wall.
Yes. In the conversation. And I like that because when you think about, often in therapy, I talk about developmental stages that we go through. And when we get out of the identity versus isolation stage, human beings are wired for intimacy. And so when we're actively listening to someone, it's a sign of intimacy. And that can happen at any stage in development, right? So I think when you're actively listening, you're into what that person is saying because you're saying and communicating to them that they have value. And when we talk about business or leadership and this idea of you have someone that comes into therapy, right? That their whole life, maybe they haven't felt like they've been heard or listened to by family members or things like that. And we've talked about this before where that individual will then be seeking that validation, if you will, from their bosses and from leaders. And so, Coach, I want you to just talk a little bit about like those leaders who you're working with, just being able to get them to understand the importance of listening, not just from the perspective of like just respect, just the history that that person might be bringing to the encounter. And I think sometimes that's where the work has to be done in therapy. So the individual needs to understand what they're expecting from the relationship. But I think it's also the leader's responsibility to also be aware of that if the individual may or may not be in therapy. Does that make sense?
It does. And, you know, that is a very unique, but probably more popular than what a lot of people understand, where people feel like they need to be heard. But I think there are a few ways to look at that. So professionally speaking, if you're having a one-on-one conversation, that's just one example. And that can happen when you're in a counseling session, or if you're in a coaching session at work where maybe you are trying to receive feedback because you're having a problem with something that's going on in that moment. Well, there's more than that. So if somebody brings a complaint to you and you never ever respond to that complaint, even if you tell them what they want to hear in the moment and you never do, it's still not active listening, because you got to throw a guy or gal a bone once in a while and at least give them a status. That's one way that people are not going to feel validated. In addition to that, say you're having a coaching conversation or a counseling conversation and somebody brings up a problem that they need help with. And let's say you tell them that you're going to help them with that problem, but then that help never comes. And then you come up to them every day and you're doing what you think is the right thing. And you're having these conversations where you're asking how their day is and if they need any help. And then they continuously bring up that thing. And then you tell them again that you are going to help them. Well, that is also, believe it or not, another way the active listening comes into play, because if you don't find a way to write that down and take note of that and then actually follow up with that, those people that are on the ground that really need your help, that's part of leadership, and you don't follow up on the things that you tell them you will, you're not only going to lose credibility, but they're going to feel like they're alone. And they might ask another person for help, but then again, that takes away from your credibility. So it's really important that you put your money where your mouth is. And when you tell somebody you're going to do something, you do it. It's part of active listening. It really, really is. We all forget, but you need to make sure that everything that you promise, you over deliver on. If you under deliver once in a while, that's okay. But you know, when it comes to this isolated feeling at work, I really feel like communication is the biggest part of that. And this constant issue where people at work say managers they don't care about me, it comes from that lack of follow-up and that lack of focus to make sure that you are placing the needs of your employees before what you need, which, by the way, is a fallacy, and that can be another call. But you know, if you don't take care of your employees' needs before your own, then they're not going to be able to do the job the way you need them to be able to keep those statistics up to where they need to be in the green that everybody loves to see on their spreadsheets. But yeah, those are kind of the main tiers that I wanted to talk about how active listening really plays a role in the workforce.
Absolutely. And you know, I have this other idea. The word listen contains the same letters as the word silent, and it's by someone named A. Brindle, which is very interesting, right?
It's
like
interesting.
We really need to be silent, and we need to be present with people. Believe it or not, active listening is so important to the therapeutic relationship that when I'm able to actively listen to people, that is what allows for people to open up about the deepest and the darkest and the most hurtful, traumatic experiences they've had in their life. Over and over again, in my outcome evaluations that I do, I hear over and over again that I'm a good listener. And to be honest with you, I didn't learn how to become a good listener in school. I've always been a really good listener and always been available and present for people. I think that when you provide space for people just to get it off their chest, sometimes people just need to ventilate in a trusted space, and they just need to be able to get it out and make sense of some of the things that are going on in their mind. Sometimes, even as the active listener, you can actually pull apart themes in their minds by asking questions, and you only ask those questions. You can only come up with those questions by actively listening to them. And so, you know, many times I'll have my clients write trauma narratives. And when they write these narratives, you can hear these connections that they're making, you know, about themselves that end up leading to what we call like distorted cognitions or distorted ways of thinking about themselves. And so active listening, man, it goes a long way in the work that I do, but more importantly, just as far as human relationships, it goes a long way in developing a trusting relationship. You know, this idea and this whole talk is about social intelligence. And when people feel like you're listening to them and you care about what they care about, then they're more likely to care about what you care about. And so it's a skill, man. It takes, you know, a lot of times, you know, people will come in and they're like, they have their agenda, right? They want to sell you something. People are they're so used to being sold on something that they expect that from you, and they expect you not to be consistent. And so when you show them that you're there to actively listen to them and you're not looking for anything else but just to hear what they have to say and provide feedback of what you just heard them say, you know, it really ends up becoming a really good conversation, and you get to build a good rapport with somebody, man. And I think that's very important, man. I think so many times, you know, in this life, people can be very egocentric. And so when you come into space with someone like a coach, like a therapist that has that empathy and warm regard and is actively listening to you, it does something to you on a physiological level. It slows you down. It, like that normal fight or flight that kicks in, right? You freeze because you're like, wait a minute, they're listening to me. They actually just said something, and you could see that happening in people when they realize, like, wow, this person actually values me as a human being.
You're right. And you know, that actually prompts something more than just a positive reaction.
Yes.
That person now, if they have a problem with something, not only with themselves, but maybe they notice something going on with somebody else they're going to come to you because it's the T word that you don't get to use a whole lot in the civilian workforce, to be quite honest with you, but it's trust. When you actually listen to people and they know you're listening because you're that guy that provides all the correct feedback, not correct feedback, but provides actual feedback and cares about them when they tell you that they have something going on, then you're going to know more than you even want to know. They're going to tell you about things that you probably don't want to hear, and you're going to welcome it because you care about that person and you're a servant leader. And, you know, it just creates a bond, really, that the people don't expect this in the civilian workforce. They automatically expect that if they say the wrong thing to their manager, that they're going to get in trouble. But if you show them that you're willing to humanize yourself and humanize them through the form of listening, then it changes things. And it changes things for the better. And you know, when you can have open conversation with your people, that open door policy that everybody talks about that really doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It actually does exist if you truly listen to people.
Right. And if you actively listen to them, you can also learn something that can actually improve your operations. It's not just, right, you know, and even though that's not the only motivator, but you can learn a lot by listening to the individuals who are doing the work. I think, you know, what's interesting about this whole idea of becoming an active listener, I think there are some steps that people can take, right? And I think, number one, you have to decide that you're going to listen. You have to make a decision, right? And I think if we can unpack that for a moment, like just making a decision to listen, like what do you think would stand in the way for a leader to decide to make that decision? What gets in the way?
Honestly, people don't understand that it takes servant leadership to do everything. And what I mean by that, I truly am answering your question, but when you are willing to put the needs and the welfare of others before yourself, then when it comes time to have a conversation with somebody, even if it's the first time, and you have built the habit of putting other people's needs before your own, you're automatically going to be in that conversation to win it. And if you don't put the welfare and the needs of other people before your own, then all you're going to be listening for are reasons to negate something that they're saying. And when you negate what people are saying, or you decide to change the subject because you don't feel like what they're saying is important to you, you don't just lose people in that conversation. They're going to be very skeptical every single time that they walk up to you until you prove that they can trust you. That first impression lasts forever.
Coach, and I hear you talk about servant leadership a lot, and this is a big statement, Coach. I think so. What I'm hearing you say is servant leadership is the leadership style that's most congruent with active listening, because there's a ton of leadership styles, right? And so a servant leader is one who is going to be more likely to be a good active listener.
Correct. Yes.
Wow.
You know, you can incorporate many different leadership styles with servant leadership. You know, even if you are, gosh, I can't even think of the formal names of the doggone, and I'm a leadership coach. I can't even think of all the formal, but if you are the type of person that believes in rewards and punishment, you can still put other people first. If you're the type of person that feels like that you want to give so much of the responsibility and decision making to the other people that you're not even involved, you know, that's still servant leadership. I think it's just taking a little bit too far. I think they call that laissez-faire.
Right. Right.
But I mean, if you incorporate servant leadership into any other leadership style, it's going to ensure you're a lot more successful.
Got
I
you.
think it's more of a mindset than it is a style, to be quite honest with you, because we are on this earth to be of service to others, in my opinion.
Right.
And I think you'll find that if you give yourself to others and you help people on a regular basis, you're going to be more fulfilled as a human being. And that action of paying it forward, whether you're a religious person or not, is going to pay you dividends, because people are also going to be willing to do the same things for you that you do for them.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that goes back to this idea about valuing people. What about this point of getting your body ready for the conversation, man? Like when you're actively listening, right? And you touched on this a little bit, Coach, when you talked about the nonverbal, the crossing of the arms. How do you get ready to actively listen to someone? Like, you know, it's getting ready to be a crucial conversation. Like, how do you get ready for that? How do you get your body ready for that?
Well, that is difficult. I think if you spend most of you, I think we all tend to veer a little bit when we are having conversations with another person. But you'll know when you're looking into the eyes of another person and maybe they start looking a little bit insecure, or they just look uneasy about the way the conversation's going. If at no other time during the conversation you notice that, well, then at that point, I think you need to check in with yourself and maybe look and see what you're doing. Maybe you're crossing your arms. Maybe you're not. Maybe you notice that while you're talking, you start looking away, or whatever the case may be. But it's time to take a check-in. Preparing for the conversation, I always use affirmations for everything and prayer for everything. But let's go away from prayer, because not everybody believes in that. Although I love the Lord Jesus Christ and all that stuff, I'm not gonna impose my beliefs on somebody else. I think that affirmations are something that work really, really well. Just telling yourself you can do it, and that you will be part of this conversation, and you will not be selfish about it. I have done that many times. And when you are intentional about anything, it works out differently than it would have if you weren't intentional. That's about the only thing I could think of. You put me on the spot and I came up with something.
No, that was a good answer, man. No, that was a good answer. Sometimes we're not ready to have a conversation too, man, to be honest with you. And I know we're kind of coming up on the time here, but
yes, we are.
Sometimes we're not ready to actively listen. And so I want to be clear and say this too, that, and I say this, especially in couples counseling, right? When I work with couples, but I think this is applicable to any relationship. We have to know our bodies and know if I'm ready to have an actively listen. And I think that's a good question about, getting your body ready, because you might not be ready to have an active listening session with someone. And I think in those moments, it's okay to say, you know what, we need a timeout right now. And can we revisit this give it a selected day and a time, not avoidance, but, scheduling a conversation. Sometimes people can come in hot and they want to, immediately barge into an office, or they want to, immediately get an answer right now. I think it's appropriate to take a step back so you can get yourself prepared to actively listening, because understand this is that it is called active listening for a reason. It is hard work. It is challenging. But the reward on the back end, as far as the relationship, is worth it.
I agree. And I really enjoyed this conversation today. I think we could have an entire series on just communicating as a whole, not just social skills, because it's just so important. If you don't communicate well, then you're going to lose everyone in your direct sphere of influence. And when it comes to ownership as a leader, you have to own that sphere of influence. And if you're not communicating well, you're not owning it. It's full circle. So we're at the end of our conversation here. So what I'll tell everybody is that if you enjoyed this and if it resonates with you, please like it, subscribe to it, share it. But most importantly, please leave a comment below so that we can keep the conversation going. I want to know what you think, and I'm sure DB does as well. We want to know what you think about active listening and how it affects your relationships, how it affects your workplace. And honestly, if you take a step back on that and you look in the mirror, I'd kind of like to know how it affects you. Maybe you're having some issues with other people in your life. Yes, that's it. You have any closing comments?
No, sir. Thank you.
All right. Leadership, people, therapy, they go together. Coaching is a wonderful thing too. That's I think that's probably what I meant to say. But we will do this again next week at 6 Central, 4 Pacific, and 7 Eastern. We'll see you then.